this is our agenda for the day. We will do a little bit of warm-up for the people who are a little bit aware of directives. People who are not at all aware, I'm a little afraid things might be a little rough for you to start with, but we will try our best to make you comfortable. Then we'll get into the basics of directive. We will not try to spend too much of time because the name suggests it's a deep dive, so we will try to make it sure that you really dive deeper into it, into the abyss. We'll talk a lot about link and scope and how we basically communicate between the parent controller of the directive. We'll try to see how transclude works, to use a transclude or to use an include, where to use them. We'll try to understand inter-directive communication, how two directives, nested directives, they communicate with each other and what are the different ways you can do that. We will get into a little bit of practical example using how you can inject models into it and then do the inter-directive communications. We'll touch a little bit on compile phase, and then once we get into all these understanding, we'll understand what the directive lifecycle is, what comes before, what comes late, and stuff like that. And eventually our goal is that we'll try to put all these things together and build something which is not very out of the world, but something which gives you an understanding of all these little pieces put together. Okay, this slide is self-explanatory. You can read it. I just put it just to make myself started. Directive is obviously one of the neatest part of Angular, which makes you really make use of it. There are probably better technologies coming up like Polymer or the new whole web component stuff. We'll not get into that debate or discussion. We'll try to make ourselves confined only to the directive world. Because till the time they are mainstream, I think if you are using Angular, directive is one of your most powerful tools that you have in your mind. Typical Angular view, people who have not used Angular, can you raise your hand? Just want to, so that I can direct my talks on this. Okay. Have you any faintest idea what Angular is? Awesome. That's good. That's good enough. So if you look at this piece of code, the first thing that you see is ng-app that basically initializes your Angular application, right? That is needed. If you omit that, your Angular application is not there, unless you do a bootstrap, not the CSS bootstrap. Then you have something called ng-controller that basically initializes your controller, where it says that, okay, this is where I'm going to put all my controller logic. It's like whatever logic, MVW, right? And then we have ng-show, which is something like where you can put a small logic and say that, do you want to show or hide this particular thing? And then we have ng-click, which is more like on-click, but a little bit of an Angular way. Now, if you notice, people who do not know about this, these are all directives in Angular. The reason it is prefixed with ng is a short from Angular. That's a very sweet name that Angular team has come up with, and it's really neat. I kind of love it. So these are directives. Now, when I say directives, these are basically reusable pieces of code that gives you a behavior or certain things that you can do with it. For example, ng-click is a wrapper on top of on-click. It handles a lot of stuff. ng-app is basically the bootstrap thing that initializes the Angular applications. These are stuff that you use within the Angular application to make stuff eventually. And well, when you actually open a directive code, source code, it would look something like this. This is called directive definition objects. I have basically copied it from the Angular docs. The idea is that most of the time, you guys have already created directives. I'm sure, and that's true for me as well, and please nod your head if you agree, that you'll probably not get into most of it, right? You'll probably get into link, you'll get into restrict, you get into templates, and maybe template URL if needed, right? But what we're going to do, at least what we want to achieve today, is at least understand all of these and see how you can make your code better using all that. A little bit of snippet that I gave before. There are around 15 actually. Replace is something. Anybody has used replace before? Okay, replace is something which is going to be deprecated. I'm sad about it because the neatest stuff of replace is that it basically, so if you see, if you know, whoever knows directive, you can use directive as an element, which is a very cool part, because now you can say, instead of div class chart, you can simply say chart, because and that makes your code so much readable, right? But then when you use replace true, that whole chart thing, when the source code actually gets rendered, will be removed. And the best part of it is that you can now validate your code. What is the biggest pain point of using Angular? People say that your HTML does not get validated, but then replace helps you doing that. But for some reason, which is very unclear to me as of now, they are saying that replace is getting deprecated in the next major version of Angular, which means it probably is going to be deprecated when it's 2. But we are still good to use replace. Go ahead.
Thanks, Suman. So, as programmers, we like to see code. Enough of, those ivory tower architects, a lot of boxes and a lot of speeches. Show me how it works, because that is what it works on machine, not the diagrams. So, okay. As programmers, what do we do? Whenever we learn a new language, what do we do? What is the first program or line of code? What does it do? Let's do it. Okay? So let me dive into the code. So as you see, right now, the header just contains a reference to Angular JavaScript file, a couple of other JavaScripts that I'm going to be using over a period of time during the talk. And it contains really nothing, right? It just contains ng equals app. So basically, when you say angular.module app, I'm just registering that module with Angular. And ng app equals app, I'm telling that, this is the main entry point of my Angular application. So anything, any directives or any controllers I define against this particular module, will be matched with Angular when it parses the view. Let's actually do it, and let's understand from that point of view, okay? So what do I want to do? I want to write my first Hello World application, and I want to do this. I want to do this, because Hello World is too much code to write, right? So I do not want to do that. I just want to do this. And when I do this, I want the Hello World to render, because Hello World is, so many characters, and HW is less, isn't it?
We will highly appreciate if you guys type along. We have paced the session in such a way that you can actually type along, even if you don't.
Anyways, so let's do that. This is what my directive definition looks like. So it's I say that against that module, I say .directive. I give it a name. I will call it HW, right? And actually, I want to be cool. I want to say H-W for some reason. Snake case. And I want to say HW, and I want to say, okay.
Hello? Which language are you speaking?
This is stylish English. Anyways, so let me go to the browser and nothing happens. Nothing is happening. Why? So what happens is, when Angular hits this H-W, it is trying to look up, okay, do I know anything called H-W? Do I understand it? Is there any directive called H-W? And when it tries to match that H-W, it does a normalization process. So it converts a snake case into a camel case. So when you declare a directive, you need to declare it like so. Let's see. There you go, hello world. And now see, if I want to have multiple hello worlds, I don't have to type hello world again and again. I just did this. That's it. So first directive, right? It's like loosely component. You're declaratively saying, spit out something, some nonsense on the screen. And this is a reusable component, great reusable component you have built. Any questions on this? All right, cool. Now, I might want to do this. So I have a div element, and I want to be, cool, and I want to say, pardon my HTML, CSS skill sets. And I want to say, use it here. And I want to delete all these things. Nothing on the screen. The reason why it's nothing on the screen is because of this attribute that I'm using called restrict. So I'm telling, Angular how my directive is supposed to be used. Is it supposed to be used as an attribute? Is it supposed to be used as an element? So I mentioned E. If I don't say any restrict, I do not put that attribute, by default it's A, attribute. And if I say E, it's an element. And I can combine, I can say EA, right? So let me actually allow it to be used as an attribute as well.
Naresh, we have a question. Yes.
Yeah.
The directive declared as what? Yes. You can. H-W, that's how they have.
So there's a normalization process. So when Angular looks up at H-W, it normalizes it, converts it. So after the dash, the first letter, it converts into capital and then looks up at the registered directive. Correct? It looks up the camel case. So there's a mapping there. That's a normalization process. So now if you see, the hello world is coming. And what is happening is, and if you look at the element here, what is happening right now is inside the div, hello world, there's a, so under the div on which the attribute is declared, there's a child element, another div, which is a template being rendered, right? Now, in the current existing Angular app, what you could do is you could say replace. And you say replace, what is happening is your div has changed. The element on which the attribute was defined, that itself gets replaced by the template. And just notice how the classes have merged. Because in the HTML, you had declared a class alert success. On the template, you had a class called row, and both got merged. Now going forward, this is like Suman already mentioned, is going to be deprecated, so please don't use it. So the default behavior is going to be as if replace is equals false. Okay? All right. And now this is fine, declaring template inline. When you have small HTML snippet, it's fine. But sometimes you need a directive which is contains a humongous amount of HTML. Then what do? You can replace this HTML with something called HTML URL. And give the name of the path of the file from where the HTML code needs to be. Just do this, and it'll pick up the HTML template from there, and it'll function exactly the same as if template was there. Got it? Okay.
This is especially important when you don't want to directive. Sometimes the templates can be quite big, and you would want to hide that whole thing into a separate HTML file. And this template is the one which gets picked up in the compile phase, which we will talk about later.
Okay, so now let's go to the next step. Yeah, go ahead.
Since you moved on to template URL, I just wanted to know whether you can cover restrict equal to C.
No, so there are two more, restrict equals C, where you can define the directive as a class name and a comment as well. There's another one for comment, and I've never seen those two use. So I'm just going to cover, instances and scenarios which are most commonly going to be useful to you. There are a lot of permutations and combinations which I don't want to get into. Make sense? Okay. Okay. Now what is it that we want to do? Okay, fine. This is hello world is over, okay, fine. Now, Suman mentioned link function. What is link? Why do we need it? So one of the things that you can do in directive is, do DOM manipulations. So basically try to understand this. When Angular sees H-W, any attribute or any element for that matter, it looks up, it's all the registered directories it has. And it says, if it finds a registered directive, it calls a link function on that. I'm simplifying it for you. So it calls a link function, and in the link function, it passes certain parameters, and it tells you, hey, this is your element, these are the attributes, you have been defined, do your stuff, do your magic. And now, as a programmer, as a developer, you are free to do whatever you want. So we'll just play around with it to understand what a link function looks like, what are the simple things you can do, and then, of course, you can be creative about what you want to do. Okay? All right. So actually, let me... One sec. Is better? Okay. So now what I want to do is, let's say I want to declare a directive called, so again I want to have a div. And I want to have a class, let's say I love this row. And what I want is some text that I want toggled with a color. Okay. The behavior that I want is, when a user clicks on this, I want it to toggle between a color. And I want turn on and off a color. And I want to use a directive. I want some reusable component, which if I put in any div element, I'll get the behavior. Right? So let's assume that particular thing is, toggle class. Okay? Sorry. Toggle class. Now, when I've said toggle, so this is how you will always go about declaring, defining directive. First, you will think about, okay, as a writer of the directive, how do I want the consumer to use it? In this place, I want him to be able to use as an attribute, and he will just mention it. That's it. So now let's go ahead and declare the directive. Okay. I'll call it snake case it. Okay, and I don't need the template in this particular case, and I want to restrict it to attribute, and I want to say I'll define a link function. So link function is one of the rare places where Angular passes parameters in a positional way, in the sense that scope, the first parameter is always the scope associated with the directive, and I'll talk about scope a bit more a bit later. Right. So it gets past these three parameters. Scope we'll discuss later. Element is the element on which that attribute or element has been defined, and attributes are all the attributes on that element. Got it? And not only that, the element here passed is a very, if you're not using jQuery, if you're in your file index.html page, if you have not loaded your jQuery, then this is a very lightweight jQuery version of element that you find. It's called JQ Lite. And if you have loaded jQuery before Angular, then this element is the dollar element that you use in jQuery. It is already passed to you. So all those methods and everything is available to you right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook on to the click event on this. Right? And like I mentioned, this I'm using jQuery, so I'll just say toggle class, and let's hope it works. Oh, sorry. All right, thanks. Cool, so let's see. There you go. Got it? So any text, if I want, I have a piece of reusable behavior. I have declared a directive. I can have anything I want. And I just say that, drop that attribute, and I get that behavior magically out of the box. Now here I have hard coded the class. What I would want is to be flexible, and I would like the user to give me what class is it that you want me to toggle. So what I want to do here is I'll say, okay, let the user define a class. Okay. Okay, doesn't work. Okay, got it. So let me just see this. Suman, can you just switch on this laptop? So let's see what's going on here. Okay. Okay, it's not mapped properly. Pardon? Yeah, it can be. So let's see what's going on. Maybe there's a typo somewhere. So I'm getting attributes, and I'm getting something called toggle class, which is not mapped properly.
The directive and the attribute name should not be same, as far as I understand. You can try changing it. Same name, right?
So anyways, let me just give it something else here again right now for timing, but it can be. I'm doing some small mistake here. Okay, let's see if this works or not. Okay. Hang on, once again, I'm just doing something. This one?
Yes, class.name.
Right, sorry. No, so for some reason the class name is not coming in. So anyways, this works, right? So I'm giving the user the flexibility to define the class name. And this works with, you can define the value on the attribute itself. The directive that you're using as an attribute, you can define it against that particular as well. Okay? So this is one very simple example of, how, you're building a small piece of reusable functionality, behavior. Right? And you're doing some DOM manipulation. What you do here, you can remove elements, you can add elements, you can remove classes, you can do animation, anything you want. Right? Any questions so far? Okay.
What is combined function?
We'll come to that later.
We'll get into it.
All right. Okay. So we understood a couple of things called element attributes. Now, how many of you understand vaguely what is scope in Angular? Okay, there's a lot of people. So anything that you see here, any directive is associated with something called scope. Now try to understand scope as a glue. So you have Vue, which is HTML, you have JavaScript at the back end. Now every control, every directive gets passed a scope. And whatever, so let's look at this example here. So this is a directive here, right? This is also a directive here. So whatever scope is visible here, this is that scope. Whatever properties you define against that scope inside that directive is visible to this entire thing. I'm just simplifying it for now. The scope that gets created for toggle class, that scope is visible to this particular section. Just like you have hierarchy in HTML, your scope is also hierarchical. And of course there are variations, and now we'll understand what those variations are and how it impacts. Got it? So what happens is, you see in the link function, you're getting passed a scope. Now before we talk about scope, let's try to build a small example. So I'm going to have a controller. In the controller, I'm going to have an name. Forget about this. And I'm going to define that this is, Superman. Okay, his name is Superman. And I'm just going to call this sample. This is just, we're trying to understand the different values of scope and how it changes the behavior. And then what we'll do is, with this understanding, we'll go ahead and build something meaningful later on. Okay? So we have a sample, and so and sorter controller is there, emp name is there, and okay, controller we are saying ng. So we understand this part. Do you understand this code Forget about this directive. Directive is a material right now. We'll build a directive later on. So this is just this code controller, right? I'm defining certain property, again on the scope of the which is being passed to the controller. Scope is, to the controller I'm defining, and magically scope is that magic, that glue, that whatever you define, any element, it can be a property, an object, a function, anything, it's visible to you here, and that's how I'm displaying the employee name. All right, very simple. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directive and see what happens if I try to manipulate this employee name. Is it visible inside my directive or not? Template. Actually, I'm just going to simplify it. I'm just going to have an input element. Okay, so I'm just going to say directive. Sorry, I was just checking if you guys had too much food or not. All right, so you see, Superman, this I did not declare any property called employee name inside my directive, but still it is visible. Why? So one of the properties when you define a directive, one of the attributes that is available to you is something called scope. If you do not define it, by default the value is false. And if the scope's value, the directive scope's value is false, then the same scope which is on the parent gets passed to you. There's absolutely no difference. So whatever property if I define some new property here, that property will magically appear in the controller as well. So if I say here, scope, okay, let me actually write the thing, right. Since here we're just going to work with scope, so I'll not bother about anything else. Now, if I just say, let's see what happens. So what I'll do is just to test out things. Actually, I'll not do anything here. So I'll just change the name, this name itself. See, I changed some value of the employee name inside a directive, and the controller's thing got impacted. So if my scope is false and I'm adding properties, and I'm making a reusable component, inadvertently I could add a property and I do not know what the controller is using, right? I have no clue. So inadvertently I could pollute the behavior in the property and the state of the parent controller. So I do not want to do that. So what is one of the options? One of the options that you could do is don't use a scope inside a directive. Another option is you could just try to make it false. Now what happens is, when you say scope equals true, what happens is this scope is now inheriting from the parent. It's a prototypical inheritance. So whatever properties you had defined in the parent scope, they are visible to you. But if you define a new property inside your directive on the scope, only your directive knows about it. So let's try it out. So here you see, inside the directive, I changed the employee name. It's only visible to the directive. It's not visible to the controller. Controller is not going to get impacted. So if I define new properties, those new properties are only visible to the directive, not to the controller. Is it clear? All right. Pardon? Yes. So, right, we'll come to that. So So there is a caveat to this. If you right now the controller employee name is a sort of a scalar value. It's not an object, right? So if I just define inside a directive when I'm saying scope.employee name, it sees my inherited object scope object does not contain the employee name. So a new property called employee name gets assigned to that, and that is how it is working. If there was an employee object on the parent controller, and I was saying that employee scope.employee object because it's visible to me, and then .employee name, it would override that thing. Because the moment you say scope.employee employee name, that employee is an object, it already exists in the parent scope, and then it is assigning value to that particular property. Make sense? It is slightly confusing. So I'll try to keep things simple, because there are too many permissions combinations. I'll try to keep simple and focus on directive itself. All right. So when I'm writing directive, I definitely do not want to accidentally pollute my parent scope, right? But sometimes, so I make it true. Another thing I could do is I could create something called isolate scope. When I'm saying when I assign an object to the scope, it's an object, right? It's not true, it's not false, and it's an object. When I assign an object to the scope, this scope is no longer even inherited from the parent scope. When you declare, creating directives which you're going to throw out in the wild for the public to use, you might want to use isolate. There are caveats to it which I'll cover. So now the employee name is not even visible. So if I just comment this line, the directive is not even able to see the employee name which was declared in the parent controller. Correct? Now what if I want that directive to, I want isolate scope because I do not want to accidentally pollute my parent namespace, parent scope's namespace, but at the same time I need some way for the user to map and provide me the parent scope's value. How do I do it? So one of the ways is, so this scope object is a basically hash of values, right? So let's say I want a property in my scope called employee name, and I want it to bind to my parent's employee thing, right? And now let's see what happens. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say right? Wow, what the hell did happen? So the employee name I'm saying, bind it to bring from the scope, but employee name is coming. What happens is when you use @, and I could have said here @hobo. That's fine too. If I did this hobo, then I would have to declare a property, this property name as hobo. Got it? So I'm saying, please declare a property in my scope called employee name and bind it to the value of an attribute called hobo. And I have a hobo here. Now this employee name is being evaluated as a string. So it's a constant, it's a one-way binding. What if I wanted to pass the parent scope's employee name, not just a string? So one way I could do it is, right? This will get evaluated by Angular. And it doesn't work. So for the timing, let's just make me employee name, and I'll just keep it this one, this. Naming of the attribute? Oh yes, I'm sorry, thanks. So this needs to be snake cased. So there you go. So now I'm getting the Superman here itself. Now let me try changing the Superman to, let's say Spider-Man. Let's see what happens. Obviously, nothing happens to the parent, right? It cannot be communicated back because it's a string. It's a one-way binding process. What if I want the ability to, do a two-way binding from the directive to the parent controller, but, my directive will not really in advance know what property. Let's say I want that. Then what I can do is I can just say equal to. Now it's a two-way binding process. Okay. Understood? Any questions so far on how, the scope can play? Around? Okay, cool. Now, one of the another option that you have here is, let's say you want a way for your directive is going to do some processing, and you want a way to call back into the controllers via some mechanism, right? You want that the consumer of your you want to expose a callback function, and you want a way where user can specify, when you want to call back, this is my controller function that should be called, and then my controller will do the rest, right? So there is something called ampersand. So let's say we are creating, okay, and in my directive, right. So in my scope of this directive, I'm going to declare a callback thing. Right? So I'm going to do some processing, and at some point of time, I will, call back. Now, as a consumer of this thing, I want to be able to say, when the notify happens, please call back this parent function called callback. Control callback. Just call back with these parameters. Okay? So that means my controller must have this thing. And I'm just going to show an alert to P. Okay. And inside this callback, I'm going to say just notify. This is a recurring feature, isn't it? Okay. All right, so notify. Thanks. There you go. Right? So let's say my directive is providing some behavior, and as part of the behavior, after something, I need to, I'm exposing a way to notify any consumer of my directive, to notify him about something, some process, something event, so that he gets a chance to do something about it, right? So here, my directive is not tightly coupled to any, callback function in the controller. Controller can create any kind of function, and he just tells the directive, hey, when you reach a certain point, just call me back, and that's it. Magically gets done. Is it clear? Yes. All right, cool, thanks. All right, so we'll cover probably one more thing, and then someone is waiting to speak. Okay. So, sometimes we have covered scope, we have covered template, we have covered link function, we've seen DOM manipulation, right, behaviors and all those things. Now, sometimes what would happen, you would want to do is, let's build an accordion. So, an accordion is, let's say, you want, okay, let's actually write it down. So, let's say, right? Let's say I have an application which shows this, and I want some behavior. I want a behavior, reusable behavior that I can drop in around any set of elements, and I want to provide the behavior where user clicks, it expands, user clicks, it toggles, it collapses. I want to build a very basic accordion. So how would I typically want to do that? I want a directive called accordion. Right? And that's it. The very fact that I've done an accordion should provide me the behavior. Now I want to build this directive. How do I do it? So let's build a directive here. So I don't need scope. I don't need a template. Yes, I need a template. Let's see about it. And I need a, I'll do something, some magic inside link. All right, cool. All right, cool. So what I want is around this thing, I want a button. I want to provide a button wherever the, thing is, the inner content is. On top of that, I want to provide a button. And when I click on the button, the inner content will collapse and expand. So let's try to do that. So I want a div. And inside the div, I want a button. Right? Okay, what else do I want to do? Yes, good. Okay, so I want this. Now I want this content. If I just do this, what is going to happen is wherever I declare, the inner content is simply going to vanish. It's not going to be there anymore. So I want to jit out the inner control, content. Let's say at this particular location. So I want my inner content to be, spit out at this particular location. So the way I do it is I mark this particular element as transclude. I say ng-transclude. Now, and another thing that I have to do, I have to say transclude equals, true. So these two things work in conjunction with each other. So what is going to happen is, and I'm actually going to just use replace also just for my convenience sake. So let's see what happens. If you look at the elements, what has happened is my button has come here, and inside the div, the inner content is already contained. Right? It already contains that. And the way I had to declare was just drop in the accordion element around that whatever. I'm just wrapping the content, in accordion. Now we want to provide a behavior. So what am I interested in doing here?
What does transclude do here?
Pardon? Transclude, yeah.
What does it do?
So what it is doing is, it is saying that I want to take the inner content of the element where of my element, and I want to grab that, take it out, and I want to spit it out at a particular location inside my template. So what's happening is, so wherever or whichever element you have mentioned this ng-transclude, the inner content is going to be taken out, and it is going to become a child of that particular div element wherever you have mentioned ng-include. ng-transclude. Is it clear? Make sense? Got it? Okay, let's provide some behavior. So there are multiple ways of providing the behavior. One thing I could do is I could do plain jQuery, add a hidden class, toggle between hidden class. That is what I'll do. For time's sake, I'll just use something more easy to do. So what I'll do is, I'll say ng-click, toggle, and what I'll do is, in this particular div, I'm going to show and hide this particular thing based on a condition. So these are out-of-the-box directives that I'm using. Okay? Is this clear? This ng-show, are you conversant with it? So basically ng-show, when I say ng-show, it's an inbuilt directive. Whenever the value of show property in the scope becomes true, that'll show. When it's false, it'll become hidden. That's all, simple. So I'm using, inside my template, I can use other directives. And here what I'll do is, let's hope it works. There you go. Is this clear? So I have got a functionality. So anywhere I have, and I just want this functionality, my directive is there. All I have to do is, before that, I just put in my directive accordion, and I have that expansion and collapse and behavior. I have it out of the box. I could have done this another way. How could I have done it? I could have just said, instead of doing ng show and then scope.toggle and calling it from ng click, instead of doing all those kind of things, what I could have done is, I could have said elm.on click toggle class hidden. Simple. I could have just toggled the class hidden on that particular div element, child div element, not on the element itself. And I would have the behavior. Is it clear?
Are we deep enough, by the way? So anyway, we are in the mid-C. Basically, we have learned what restrict is. What we have learned is replace, transclude, templates, link. Now, what we have noticed here is there is only one place where you're basically adding function, adding behavior, adding stuff to do, right? Rest are all our static values. Directive have 3 places where you can actually add behavior, and they run in a particular order. We will see those, but before that, in directive, you can assign your own controller as well. Now, why would you want to do that? Because as you see, you can do most of the stuff in your link function, right? You can assign a function to a method. You can assign, change the scope variables and stuff like that. You can do all that stuff. Why would you need a controller function? I would request you, if you already have your system with you, open the folder that we have shared, if you can, please. There are some stuff that we would going to do, and hopefully that will be enjoyable. Yeah. The same folder, if you guys can also open, that will be great. And whoever does not have it, you can pair it if you want.
You got the code in the pen drive?
Okay. The folder that I want you to open is controller, index.html. It will throw you an error. I'll tell you how to fix it. But yeah, if you can just open that file, that would be great. And I'll also open my Windows. Okay. Right. Yes. The first file that I would like you to open is controller.js. And in your index.html file, the controller.js file is commented out. If you uncomment that, your error should go. Everybody has an error-free page now? Yes? No? Okay. Whoever has opened it, anyway. So the idea is that a controller in directive, there are 2 main differences for a link function and a controller function, or rather a controller in a directive. One, in controller, if you can see, we have $scope, $element, $attributes, and they are actual injections. Unlike in link, where you have the positions are important in link, right? The first one has to be scope. The second one has to be an element. The third one has to be attributes. In controller, there is nothing like that. It acts as same controllers that you normally define in other places of Angular applications. That's the first thing. Second thing is, in link, you cannot do any injection other than what Angular provides you. So the 5 things that you can inject to link. We have showed 3. The 4th and 5th we will see. In controller, this thing is not there. And the second thing, the reason you would use a controller is mostly for sharing methods among directives. This is something where I want to spend some time, and will be very grateful if you guys can, do some hands-on, because I have provided the files to you, but it does not have all the stuff. And if you do it, probably you will get better understanding of it. Okay. So anyway, let's first run this thing so that we know what is happening. I didn't do anything? Okay. Let's see. Okay. The other thing that you have to do to make this thing work is basically uncomment the first line 21, which has directive 0. Basically, otherwise there is nothing to show really. Yeah. So now when you say that, what it says is that the first line it says inside controller. Hopefully you have the stuffs open. And the second line it says using injected service. And the third it says in link. This gives us an important point. The way the directive runs, first it runs the controller. And then it goes to the link function. So if you put something on the link function, it will run last. And if you really modify your scope in the link, and if you already modified the scope in the controller, it will get overridden if you are using the same name. And the reason I have put that line called using injected services because just to show that you can, if you move this side, there is this log service which is injected, and you can use that service. And this you cannot do in a link function. Although, you can do that same thing when you put the log here. So then you can use that in the link function. Why would you do that? Maybe some control over what you are writing. OK. Now, this is a very simple thing. I mean, we are not really doing anything. Let's open the other file, which is controller communication. And that's a little larger file. I will comment this line. That's an odd one. And if you can uncomment this whole thing from car to car. Seriously? OK. Sorry, I'm a little used to WebStorms where you can do this thing, but here not. Is there a better way? I can do a replace or something, right? But it will replace everything else. Where is the end key? Yeah. Windows have an end key. Control / it didn't work here. I did. It commented it again. Oh, really? OK. Thanks. That's the best thing. Anyway. Right. Right. And this is basically the markup. And then we have, you can uncomment this line. OK, you have to uncomment this line, controller communication.js. I would not have a lot of. I'll just simply basically remove this thing. I'll want this one as a layout, single column layout, and what I want is this file. Anyway, right. So I have actually 3 directives. One is a car. And then I have an AC, alloy wheel, and ABS. Alloy wheel is named as AW. The way this thing is constructed is the car has a controller which says, which basically defines a scope variable called scope car properties, which is an array. And then I have written a small function using this. And say this.create part, and then say function part. Basically, when you pass the part, it basically pushes the text, whatever you put in, to the array. And in the link function, I have said that whenever this directive runs, you basically say this car I have what. And how I'm going to put those what? Using 2 more directives. And the way it is used is this. You have a car, then you have an AC within that. It's a nested directive. And the second one is you have a car, and then there is a div, and there are 3 directives inside it. And if you can see, what it does is, this car have AC, because it has a nested directive called AC. And we will see what AC does. And then the second one says this car have alloy wheel, AC, and ABS. Let's see the third directive codes. I mean, the directives which is actually doing it. So the AC says, ignore that require line. We will get into it. The AC says it's a link function. Link function says car.createPart. This is interesting. What I have done is I have called a method which is inside the car directive. Can you see? If you have the file with you, you should be able to see it. The car directive, this.createPart, we have called it from another directive, car.createPart. How does that happen? If you see, there is a key called require. There is, this thing was a tilde or something? Yeah. So tilde or whatever. That thing and then a car. It says that this directive, AC, requires the controller of the directive called car. I'll explain what that thing means, but this says that I need car directive, the controller of the car directive. And the moment you do that, if you notice the fourth parameter of the link function, it says car. Now that is just a name. You can name it whatever you want. But the magic happens is that when require you have said car, the controller of that car gets injected to that car variable. It's the constructor of that. And that's why you get the car.createPart method available inside the link function. Make sense? Make sense? Yes. Awesome. Yes?
Is it also available to controller, the card variable?
The which variable?
Card variable, card.
It's available only inside the link.
Only inside, not inside the controller.
Which controller?
The directive controller.
The directive, this one? It's not yet.
Controller of the AC.
No, it's not. Because that's how you are pushing it inside the link. If you remove that, it will not be available anyway. Actually, it's a good question. I can try that. Let's see. It will not be, because these are supposed to be services. Let's try that. It's a good question. It won't be. Yeah, but it will request car as a service. It will expect car to be a service, not really a controller. No, that it would request a service again. It will look for the service list of the Angular registered services. By the way, that's a good question, Sadab. The reason it is available here is because Link expects that there. You may name it something else. You may name it just controller. It will still be the car because you have required car there. Does that make sense? Okay. Now is the fun part. We are going to now modify these things and see how it works. The rest of the stuff are actually same. So the AW is allowable, where also I'm requiring car. The ABS is also the same thing. It basically goes that pushes the array to the array, right? Now let's do this. Now the next question comes is what that small thing doing there before car. There are 3 of those. If you see the PPT, it says this one, question mark, a tilde, and then both of them together. You can simply ignore it. I mean, you can simply say that I just need car, right? Try doing that and run the program. See what happens. Tell me what happens. Does it throw an error? It throws an error, right? It will, because when you remove that, it expects the directive to be a sibling of the directive from which you are calling. Bye-bye. At the same level. The ones that we have, if you see the HTML file, it has car, the AC is inside. And the second one also, the AC, AWS, and everything is inside. Make sense? So that is not available. The idea is that what if I remove the AC from here? It's quite possible, right? You remove the AC from here. Where is the end? Yes. No, it didn't work. Yes, it worked now. The expectation is that since it's a sibling, this should work, right? Try it. It did not. It did not work. Any faintest idea why it did not? No, it's a sibling. They are all at the same level, car and AC. Okay, I'm not trying to be a smart ass. We'll talk about it. First of all, the way the directives lifecycle goes, okay, we will not talk about that later. We'll talk about that later. Let's try this. Because that says that you find it anywhere it is. Still it will not work. It's a little contradictory, but it is not working. That's where an interesting thing comes, how the directives are compiled, parsed, and thrown out. There is an order. There is an order in which they does it, right? So if it is car and AC, it will, the array of directives get created. The car is first, AC is second, and it basically starts putting things one after the other. But the point is that when this function is getting called, the element.dext car have, you're right. No. I have not deleted the next two. That's why. Yeah, these two has to go. Yes. At least the error should go. Is it there? Okay. Yeah, it's there, right? Oh, right, absolutely. Sorry. Yeah. Now, the good thing is that it has found it, right? It has found that guy. You can now remove this thing also. Sorry, I was just fooling around. It was wrong. It will work. Because they are at the same level, it will find it. The only thing that you would try to avoid without using that question mark is because the question mark at least falls back very safely. If it does not find it, it will simply return null. And then you can do a check that if car is null or not, and then do the rest of the stuff. What I mean by that is that here, before calling that car.create function, you can do a if car equal to null, stuff like that. You know, it will return null if it doesn't find it. But our problem is not that. Our problem is that it is finding it, but it is not it is not executing car.create part. And why so? Well, it is executing, but the only problem is I'm not getting this thing working, right? Let's now start putting some console logs. You might want to do that as well. This is interesting now. We say console.log, and then I say I am in car controller, right? It says I am in car controller, great. Then it says, let me copy this. It says I am in car link function basically. Oh no, sorry. Control L, Control D, yes. This one, I am in car link. And then it says, let's go to this guy. Let's say so where it is being called from? This link, right? You say I am in AC link. Let's say how it works. It says I'm in car controller. Then it says I'm in car link. Then it says I'm in AC controller. What happens is that when it is in car controller, it exposes the functions. So that's why your AC gets those when it executes, right? But it comes to the car controller right away, or the car link function right away. Here. And then it does not have that, right? This thing has already executed. The scope car property to string, the car property is null here. It doesn't have anything. So that's why it doesn't work. How do we mitigate that if you really want to do that? There is a if you remember the first screen that I showed, all the 15 properties that we have, there was one property called priority. Remember that? Right. Now, let's say the priority is 10. Let's give that a lower priority. Now, see what happens. Notice the log below. Is it visible at the back? What has happened is, before it was, I am in car controller, I am in car link, I am in AC controller. Now what has happened is, I am in car controller, I am in AC controller, I am in car link. No? Not happening? Yes? No? No? Okay. I'll tell it again. So initially, before the priority was there, let's just man, I hate this. Okay. Before it was there, if you see, it says I'm in car controller, so I am executing the car controller. Then it says I'm in the car link. When it's executing the car link function, in the car link function, I am putting that element.text, this car have the properties, right? The scope property is an array now. It has been initialized as an array. But what I have done is basically, I have said .toString. Right? So it will just convert the array to a string with a comma separated values. Now, that does not have any value right now. And then it goes to the car create part when you have that AC there. So before the AC gets injected to the array, the element gets updated. That's the order in which it does. Now, the moment I add priority, what happens is, I am saying that the car has a higher priority than the AC. So the car controller first runs, then the AC controller runs, then the car link runs, and then the AC link will run. But actually, it's not the AC link. It will run the AC link first and then the car. We will get into that. The reason being, the link function that is running that you're seeing here is post link. So actually, man, I did it now. Okay. So anyway, it's a priority by which you can define that in which order the controllers and the link functions will execute. The reason it's a little hairy right now is because ideally what should happen is that you would say, okay, the car controller has run, the AC controller has run, then the car link has run. Why did the AC controller go first? And why the link at the second? Because it should be car controller, car link, and then the AC controller. We'll talk about it later when there is a pre and post link that we will see. Anyway, so what we understood now is that we can have car, and the best part is that if you do this, is basically will return null if you don't have a car. You can actually do this also. Where is that? Yeah, this one. It says that you look up the DOM chain. This is especially important when you are doing something like this, the second thing, where you have the car and then the children's are AC, ABS, and AW. The AC, ABS, and AW, they are saying that I require a car controller which is my parent. This will go up the DOM chain. This instruct itself to go up the DOM chain. It will never go down. That's a bad word. Right. So, any questions? Because I expect some questions. Any questions, please? No? Yes, please, go ahead. I'm so glad.
Yeah, so let's say we have another directive inside AC. Right? So if I say, if I link it to the car, and if I want to link it to AC as well, so how would I do it?
Yes. I'm glad that you asked that question, and let's do that. So let's say I have I'm in AW, and I want to add both car and AC. It's simple. You have to make it an array. The only caveat is the way you use it. Both are my, so car is my parent, but AC is my sibling. So what should be it? What should be it? What should I write here? Without what? That's it? Yes, that's it. Now, since it's an array and this whole array gets injected here, so we'll not rather name it as a car. We will say it CTRLs, controllers. And the way you would use it is CTRLs and the 0. Yes. So you can inject multiple directive controllers into a directive. And this is the way you would use it. Hopefully it works. Did I? Yeah, I deleted things, right? Yeah. Okay. You want that? We can do that as well. ABS or AWS? Which one do you want? AW? That was remaining. Okay. Then you have to AW depends on AC, right? Yes. So then we have to do this. You can actually resort to this and this as well, but this will do. Make sense? Nothing would change. I mean, it's just that it just works. So a little recap. We use controller to share methods between directives. It's also advisable, at least the Angular docs do advise that you put all your DOM manipulation code in your link function, and if you have business logic, if you really have inside a directive, although it is not recommended you should have it in a service, but at least when you're using it, use it inside a controller function. Because the controller function runs before the link function, so your scope variables will be available to your link after you have modified it. You can use, you can basically inject directive controllers for a nested or a sibling directives using a require method. This is a very example kind of a stuff. We will see a real life thing how we actually use it in a real life situation that Naresh is eager to do that. And there we will require ng model. So ng model is a directive. It has a controller. Go to your go to Angular source code and see that it's a directive. It has a controller, and it has a lot of methods inside the controller. When you require ng model, all those methods are available to you. It's fascinating. Otherwise, you would not be able to use it. You can use all the methods of which is exposed from the ng model controller from any other directive that you write just by saying require up ng model. That's it. Over to you, Naresh. Yes, yes, please.
So let's say I have a partial and it has one controller. And it has a directive and it has one controller.
Okay.
First, that partial controller would be executed and then the directive controller would execute it, or how would it be ordered?
We will get into that in pre and post link. What happens is that, I'll just give a hint. What happens is that you can change the order in which the ng include is a directive itself. What happens is that you can change the way the Angular directives gets executed using priority. You can stop the execution order using terminal. Wherever you put terminal true, it will stop the execution. And the funny part is, when the directive execution happens, whatever by default all of them are at 0. But when you define the order, the way the directive execution happens is that top down. So the outer one will get executed first, then the middle one, and then the middle one. But the funny part is, when you split your link functions to pre and post, your controller will execute first, then the pre-link. And for the post link, they don't get executed. The post links will start executing right from the center of the DOM layer. It will go up. That's something which we will see in the later. And we will see how transclusion happens with actually going through the DOM rendering. Thanks, guys. Any other questions, by the way?
Okay, so let's do something interesting now. What do we want to do? So we have learned about scope, we learned about DOM manipulation. Let's build something simple and something which is useful, practical, right? So Suman, talked about controller, inter-directive communication. Why do we need it? Let's try to take an example and look at a practical thing that we might actually want to build, that we might actually want to use in an application, and see, okay, what do we need to build that, right? So what I'm going to attempt is now try and build a Angular date picker, a very bad, dirty, poor man's Angular date picker. All right, cool. So let's say we have in the scope a property called, forget about all these things right now, just forget about all these things. Let's keep it simple. Let's say I want to write a directive, and I want to make it look like slightly like a button, and when the user clicks, I want to wrap a jQuery date picker. And I want that, the calendar to pop up. When the user clicks on it, I want that value to be selected, and that button's label should become that particular, date value. Okay. So let's go step by step. All right. So what do we want to do? So that let's build a directive. Let's call that directive date picker. Okay. Picker. I want it to be an element. Yes. No transclusion is required. For convenience sake, I'll leave the replace equals true. And let's create a simple button. Select date. Okay. And forget about these things right now. So I want the user of my directive to be able to just say, hey, date picker, and magically something should come up, and it should be able to click there and choose a date, right? So let's first see, okay, button is coming, fine, no behavior right now, cool. So let's put some behavior. What do I want to do? So I'm going to go the easy way and use Angular. And I will tell you why I would prefer to actually do it pure DOM manipulation slightly later on. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that replace is true dot date picker dialog. Okay, function. So let's say date picker comes on out. Oh, hang on. So button, I need to hook it up. Say please feel free to code along. I can slow myself down a bit if you want. And inside this, nothing happens. Cool. So let's make sure the jQuery stuff is there. Yes, it is there. Okay. Cool. So I do this, and obviously nothing happens. Cool. So what I'm going to do here is now, I'm going to show here a scope called my date. You know, let me just call it something silly right now. And inside when it's selected, I'll just say scope dot let's see if it works or not. Doesn't work, okay. My date. There is some function here. Okay, I'll have to do some cheating. Hang on. Yeah, that's fine. So dialog, it says null is not required. Okay, so the thing is coming here. For some reason it doesn't get displayed here, right? Pardon? No, that doesn't depend. I'm doing some mistake here. Oh, good point. All right, so I'm doing this fine. This is fine. And so the question to ponder is, you know, what the hell did I do? Okay. So this is absolutely fine. You know, I'm doing and it should appear. No need, the value is coming here and I'm assigning. Now there is some reason why it's not happening. Sorry. So the reason why it's not happening is, see, whenever you change any scope's property value, what happens is whenever you do inside an Angular construct, any Angular callback or anything like that, the Angular is aware that you have changed something on the scope. Now what you're doing is you're passing a callback function to jQuery, right? This function called function value, and you're doing this scope.myDate is equal to value. This is a callback function you're passing to jQuery. jQuery is calling that function whenever the date is chosen. So now this code is getting executed inside of jQuery. Now Angular is no longer aware that, oh, have you really changed something in the scope? It is not aware. So when you're doing things like this, and this is a very common scenario that you'll face, what you would want to do is, there's something called scope.apply, $apply. And you execute this inside the context of that particular thing. Right? Got it? So now you have a wonderful, super duper control which you can be, feel proud of, and just use this. I'll push it into GitHub, open source it, and you got a new control where wherever you want, you can just drop it and you'll get a date selector, right? Going. What else do you want? So, yeah. So not necessary. So you can wrap the entire thing inside a scope $. So yes, if you have multiple functions inside each one of them, yes, you have to do scope $apply. Could you speak a bit louder, please? Scope.phase. Okay. So this has always worked for me. I'm not sure exactly why it didn't work for you. We'll have to see the specific use case. Okay? Usually this should work fine. Angular thing, yes. Yes. So scope is getting passed. It's a $apply is a method on the scope object itself that is being passed to you. So you have to call it on that $apply. It's not some other library. Got it? So now fine, we have got an Angular controller, and we are so happy. Now let's say the user wants to, typically why would you use it? Why would you just want a user to just check a date? You want the consumer of this, directive to be able to set the value, the selected value to some property it has in the controller, isn't it? So let's say typically what I will do is, I'll probably have a controller here. And I'll say ctrl, and I will have a controller here. And I'll delete all this rubbish, all this crap. And I will just say $scope dot date of birth. And for now, I'm just going to assign some. Right? And what I want is that, I want to use this in a form, and whenever the user, selects this date, my date of birth should change. So I want to use this control to, to actually have the user set the value of my controller property. That is what I want to do. So one way to do it is, I will say, I have a property called date of birth. Please have the user select, and whatever value is selected, it should get assigned to my controller's date of birth property. Fair? Clear? Is it clear? All right. So now as Suman had shown that how do we do it? We say require. What do we require here? ng model. We want to give the flexibility to the user to either define it or not define it. If the user doesn't want to define it, fine. If the user wants to define it, I want to take advantage of it. To keep things simple so that you understand, right now I will not, I'll make it compulsory. I will not go into if and else kind of thing. Right, so what is going to happen now? In this thing, the fourth parameter that is going to be passed is going to be the ng model controller. I can remember what ng model, I could have called it XYZ, doesn't matter. It's just a parameter name. But what is important is in that parameter, that ng model's controller gets passed to me. Got it? So the first thing that I'll do here is, since I've said it's required, ng model has got a method, property called render. You can assign it a function. And this function, this controller's method, this function will get called whenever the model value gets assigned from outside. So when you're saying date of birth, I'm assigning the value from the controller, right? So when the controller is updating it or it is assigning the value, your render method will get called. Now what do I want to do in the render method? I just want to set this thing. What do I set to? How do I know what is the model value? How do I get it? So there's another property, $model value. Is it clear? Let's see in action. See the screen refresh, and this is the value that I've assigned in the controller. Do you see this? Make sense? So to make it slightly more clear, what I'll do is, here I'm going to define an input box, and I'm going to say bind it to date of birth. Right? The moment I'm changing, this text box is not inside the directive, and I'm changing it, and that value is getting communicated to the directive. And what is happening to inside directive? Why is it happening? Because I have registered my function against the $render property of the ng model controller. Is it clear? Now what I would like is when the user selects this, user changes this, okay, but the model value has not changed. How do I notify the model that, hey, the value has changed? So the way to do that is, when the date is selected, not only do I want to update this, I want to say ng model dot $set view value, okay, value and value. Nothing happens. Okay, this is interesting. $set view value. Time to cheat again. So why is it not happening? So because exactly. So the reason is these two things are conflicting. So what I can do? Sorry. So actually I don't need this at all. No, actually I do. So my date is. It's working? What I had done was, I had done scoop equals true. And remember, it's a prototypical inheritance. So whenever I'm assigning DOB, the DOB is now overwriting that. So on one hand, I'm notifying it through that. And on the other hand, it's just overwriting that value. So isolate scope and, just call it particular date thing. Or don't even use the scope. Just say, So ideally, what I would want to do is, so understood, does it make sense? So now there's a two-way communication. So if I have a form and I need to accept 4 different date values from the user, all I have to do is say date picker and bind it to the model property, whatever I want. And magically that behavior happens. Make sense? Clear? Is it clear? Because the ng model is one of the few directives that you will be very frequently using. Even when you're building custom directly, it is very likely that you will be actually depending on ng model for user sake's convenience sake, right? Clear? Okay, cool. All right. Now, although I have talked about isolate scope and scope equals true, there is slight caveat to that. So what happens is, in one particular element, if you use multiple directives, and multiple directives have scope equals true, then it's not that each one of those inherits from the parent scope and a new scope gets created for each of them. No, only one new scope ever gets created for an element. So if there are multiple directives in a scope, there are multiple directives in a particular element, and they have all their scope equals true, then one new scope gets created and it gets passed to each one of those directives. So if one directive defines a property on that scope, it is visible to other directives which had scope equals true. So be careful about this. Even with isolate scope, if you have multiple directives on an element, only one directive can ask for an isolated scope. If you use 2 directives in an element where scope is an isolate scope, you'll get an error. It'll throw you a big red box in the console. It won't work. And if you have one isolate scope and multiple directives asking for a new scope, that isolate scope's new scope gets passed. So although it, we say isolate, it's not 100% isolated. So be very careful. Be very careful when you're writing, especially when you're going to producing a directive for the world to use. Be very, very careful. Do you really need a scope? Do you really need a isolate scope? Can you do write code without scope or not? For example, this use case I could have done without ng-click and without my date, without scope. How would I do it? I would just use the DOM manipulation. I will hook into the click event of that element, and on the click event I will launch the date picker, allow it to choose, and just need the model. So I can write this directive without any scope at all whatsoever. Make sense? All right. Now let me build one slightly more complex example. This will be a particularly fast, the one that I'm going to show you now, and I expect you to hand code. So I'm just trying to demonstrate many things coming together now. Okay. Please ask me to slow down if it gets a bit hectic. Okay, so what I've done is I'm using high charts, all right? And what I want is I want a directive called bar chart. So usually what high charts call, usually what you call column chart, I like to call it bar chart for some reason. So just humor me. So what I want is I want to show a bar chart, right? And a bar chart can have multiple series of numbers, right? And the way I want to develop is, so this is the way I've written a bar chart. Okay, I want a bar chart. I want its title to be blah, blah, blah. And I want certain labels, right? On the x-axis, I want certain labels. These should be the labels. And I want multiple series. So I'm declaratively, I'm declaring the series as a declarative syntax inside HTML itself. And I'm saying repeat this series for each score set object in the collection called filtered scores. I will talk about this a bit more. So what is going to happen for each, if this filter scores is an array, is a collection of objects, and for each object, there's going to be one series element inside bar chart, right? And each series element will become a series of bars inside the chart. So this series element can only exist in context of bar chart, right? So it requires bar chart. So let's look at this directive. So I've declared a bar chart directive. I want it to be used as element. Don't worry about transclude for now. So so since the series is going to be inside the bar chart, I want to transclude whatever the series are contained. It should be even after the bar chart is rendered, it should be a child of the bar chart, right? Otherwise, the template will simply replace. Next time, there will not be any series in the DOM at all. And I'm saying, my scope needs a labels property which is mapped to the labels attribute. Remember this one? Okay. And then I'm defining a controller. And again, please do not use this code for production. It is highly inefficient. It isn't written just in a couple of hours. So don't judge it for its code quality at all. It can definitely be optimized a lot. All right, so I'm exposing a method called setSeries. Name is the name of the series, and the data is a collection of data points for that series. Clear? And what I'm doing, I'm just declaring a hash object series named as the hash key, and I'm saying the data is the data points. So these data points belongs to this series. This data point belongs to this series. That's all, simple. And then every time a set is series is added, I'm calling it draw chart. Don't worry about what is inside draw chart. All draw chart does is it just calls high charts API. It says, okay, this is a chart option. Give me a column chart, and these are a set of data. That's all it does. That's all. Now I need a series directive. So I'm declaring a directive called series. I'm saying, it depends on bar chart, and it also depends on model, ng model. And so my fourth function is actually a collection of controllers. The first element in the controller and the collection will be a bar chart controller. The second controller in that particular collection will be an ng model controller. And what I'm doing is, whenever that model, so to understand why do I need an ng model, what I've done is, I've said that this series data is contained inside this property. There are alternatives to doing it. You might not have done ng model here because I'm not doing a two-way binding. I could have just said, declared a scope property, and I could have mapped it to an attribute, and I could have got the value. I did not need a two-way binding, but still, I've used ng model. So I'm saying the series data points is going to be contained inside the property called scoreset.scores. Clear? Let me actually bring this up a bit. Got it? So I'm just saying it is the data points that the series must display is bound to the property called scope property called scoreset.scores in the controller. So my directive does not need to care from where the data is coming. As long as data is there, it will do its job. It's totally loosely coupled. It can do anything. It can show any data point, right? And what it does inside the link, whenever that data is available to it, it just calls the bar chart controller. And remember, I have exposed a method called setSeries. So it calls a setSeries with the title, and it calls it with the model. Yeah.
I see that you are injecting NG model. Is it a good practice? Whatever we can use it. Like API is also one way to inject controllers model to your desktop.
You can use ng model here, but probably it's not required here because you're not allowed. So let's say we were building a graph where you were building the graph to be interactive. In that case, you would definitely want to use ng model because that is standard. There are other ways to do it, but ng model is the where it is very commonly used. That is a way to people know data binding is done. They do not need to understand a different attribute, right? But you could have done through different attribute as well. Okay. So I'm just calling the bar chart method bar chart controller, and I'm calling the attributes title. So every series I'm assigning a title here, right? So whatever the title is, I'm passing the title and saying, hey, against this this is the name of the series, right? And these are the data points. That's all. Finished. Now, just to give you a little bit context and to make it slightly more interesting, what I'm doing is inside the controller, I'm getting scores. I'm getting hypothetical scores of Tendulkar and Jadeja, right? And I'm getting for this year, this was the average per test score, per math score of Tendulkar. So this is, I'm just hypothetically saying that, okay, this is the data set probably you'll get. You'll probably make some service call to the Ajax call to the server, get some data, right? And then what I'm doing is I'm exposing a method called apply filters, because in this, let me open that. Okay. So this, what I'm doing is under apply filters, what I'm doing is, if you give it a start year and end year, I'm just doing some slicing, dicing, aggregation. I'm running some map functions, doing some transformations, and grouping it by such in whatever players are there. I'm grouping it by them, filtering by the start date, end date, and I'm showing the graph, right? So every time you mention a start year and say apply filter, this apply filter function will get called on the controller. The controller will do the on the superset, it will run some transformations, do some filtering, grouping, and then it will assign it to the. What will it assign it to? It will assign it to this particular property collection. Filter scores. So controller has a property called filtered scores, which it is transforming the raw data and assigning the filtered and grouped data to filter scores. Clear? So every time I change the filter, that changes. So let's see how it works. So I have data from 2001 to 2005. I want to see only from 2002. That's it. That's a directive. So I want to see only till 2004. That's it. And to the end user, what is it going to look like? This is what it is going to look like. That's it. That's all the code there is. So you have built a directive, reusable set of directives that can be used to show a bar chart for any amount of series, right? For any data, scores, anything. So you are now you want this functionality where chart, you just say, hey, this is data, render your graph. These are series. And everything is dynamic. Your directive is not dependent on any particular controller's method, any controller, any particular connection, nothing. As long as it provides data, it just displays it.
How many of you have used compile before? Compile stage? And how was your experience? What did you think that you used compile for? Any, if you want to really say that.
Just publish some value and I want to convert it to HTML dynamic.
Okay. So this is what Angular team thinks compile to be. So when you are at compile stage, so there are three places where I said that you have you can write a function, right? So you have a compile, you have controller, you have link. Now in link we saw it, and mostly what we saw is basically post link. Controller we saw, where we are mostly, the recommendation is that you put your business logic or use that place for sharing methods among directives. And then the other one is compile. The thing about compile is that what is recommended that you mostly do template transformation in compile. Nothing more than that. Couple of reasons. I have this file which just shows how compile looks like. It's in compile.js inside controller folder. Basically what it's, okay. And yeah. So what it says is the compile function when it runs. So if you have a compile function in your directive, two things that happens. Compile takes two attributes. Again, this is similar to link. The first one is a template element. The second one is a template attributes. It's important to understand here is that what we are passing inside compile is a template, which means if you have ng transclude in your directive, you will not get that. That's number one. Number two, you cannot do any scope augmentation transformation in compile because scope itself is not available while you are compile phase. Compile phase is mostly used for, let's say you want to do some DOM manipulation depending on some attributes that you pass from the directive. That's why you see T attributes is available. So the attributes that you pass inside that elements are available in compile phase, but not scope. The difference that you can see in a link function and a compile function is, and the link function will start with scope, element, attribute. Compile function does not have the scope. That's one difference. Second is, you don't have, it's recommended that you only do the template transformation. If I run this thing, let's see how it looks. I go to compile. Seriously? Okay. Right. It's all uncommented out. Good. So compile directive. Am I not seeing the same file that I'm supposed to see? Oh, this one? I was doing this wrong one? Okay. That's fine. It's okay. That's okay. I'll figure it out. Thanks, Naresh. Right. Compile.js, index.html. This is not my index.html. Mine was very naive, trust me. Okay. Right. Right, the third step. God, I have 2 more steps. Okay, and is this one? Yeah. And then I have to enable the compile. So what we are doing here is basically, if you can see, I have a template which says div class sections, inside which there is a directive template. In the compile function, I'm saying, I'm saying inside the compile function, I'm adding a new class, and what I've done is template element children section new class. It modifies the template. And then what you see is a return function. The return, what compile returns is a link function. If you have a link function in your directive and compile, the link function that you define in your link will not work. The only way to do that is basically you have to return the link function from the compile. It will simply ignore it if you have it. The return can be 2 types. One, the function itself, that is a post link, and the other can be an object with pre and post, which we'll see right away. And so whatever you return is actually treated as a link function and runs after controller if you have it. So the order in which the functions run inside a directive is first the compile happens. So if you are doing any template transformation, that happens. Then the controller works. So if you have some business logic, those things gets initialized. Then the link happens. Inside the link, 2 things. First is the pre and the post, as the name suggests. That's where the link.js files works. What I have done is I have said a variable called link function. It's pre and post, and from compile and returning the link function only, because that's the only way the link function will work. To prove that the link function does not work the second time, let's just home. Hold on. Man, I wish I could use WebStorm. Right. So when I'm in source, if you see, let me open the directive as well. This directive goes off. This directive comes in. What happens is that it says I'm in pre-linking, I'm in post-linking, but the reason the thing that I'm trying to say here is that you have returned the link function from the compile, and you have also said link as link functions. Ideally speaking, it basically proves that the second link function is completely ignored if you have a compile function. If you comment this out, the return function, the link function will not work at all because you have not returned anything from the compile. So you have to completely remove this whole thing. That's when it's going to work. What you normally do in compile, as I said, that you only normally try to do the change template thing. Otherwise, compile is very rarely would need compile method. When you go, yes, please.
So, say my directive depends on some data which is coming from server. Would it be ideal to have your Ajax call in the compile function? Because that is what is running first.
You can, but the ideal way to do that is controller. The best place to do that is a controller.
Okay.
And we'll talk about pre-post. I'll say what you do in pre. Yes. Yes, Avnish.
So I have another question.
Yes.
So you said in compile we cannot manipulate anything or pass anything to the scope. But then if you see a link function is nothing but a closure because it is getting returned from your compile function. So you still have access to your T attributes from your link function. So you can still pass it or you can still plug it into your scope. Right?
Yes, you can. But then none of the scope methods are available with you. You can do that. I mean, you can always do that stuff, but the scope methods are not available because you're not putting anything from the scope. And the other reason it is not recommended is that when the compile runs, it's purely the compilation phase. Your transclusions are not there. So if you have states where you have transcluded stuff into the directive, they are not available. So you might fall into a situation where the scope do not travel properly. So it's not. And that's what Angular also recommends. Compile phase is a completely, it compiles the stuff. It compiles your DOM. And that's why the attributes are available, because you can then at least say, you can take conditional decisions what to compile, what not to compile. But yeah. Yes, Avnish.
I just want to ask, like, I am manipulating the template, right? If I add a directive to it on a runtime, on the template, will that work or not? As an attribute and as a class or something like that?
It should, ideally speaking.
One more thing, like, I am facing the problem, I am used that. I want to pass some scope thing in that. Is there any way to pass that kind of thing?
Inside that directive?
Yeah, inside that directive.
Wow, man, I have not thought about it. Can we take it offline?
Sure, why not?
Yeah, I don't know, man. So you are putting, so basically, okay. The Transclusion does not, Transclusion itself is a directive.
Yeah, Transclusion.
And that does not get really, that does not, what we say? It does not work. So the transclusion happens after that. So probably it's after the pre-linking happens, those thing gets into it. So maybe. Sorry, I have not really done that.
Okay.
Okay. Linking has again two states basically. So the way the directive lifecycle happens is that first the compile happens, there's a controller, then the link. By default, the link function is the post-link function. But you can split that into two places called pre-linking and post-linking. What's the difference between these two? Both are essentially same, they look same. They have scope, they have element, they have attributes, they have controllers, by the way. But the way they say is that the difference is between pre and post is that in pre-linking phase, your transclusion has not happened yet. When you are in post-linking phase, your transclusion has happened, which means if you have transcluded some other DOM elements inside your directive, that is not available in pre-linking phase, when you are in pre-linking phase. So it is recommended that you do not do any DOM, what we call the DOM event attachment or stuff like that inside pre-linking if you're into it. The best thing to do inside pre-linking is scope transformation, scope object transformation. For example, if you're creating a directive like ng-grid or something, it's a very good thing to do adding the meta tags to all the objects inside the array that you're going to use in your grid finally inside pre-linking phase. In the post-linking phase, you do all your event attachment stuff. Let's see how, and just to prove that point that the templates are not available and stuff like that, let's look at this thing. Let's basically do a time travel. So I do what? I just do this. I do this, and I open this up. Right, so I am in link transclusion. Let me comment this out. And okay. Sorry, I have to do this again. I can't help it. The bad thing that Mac has done to me is that it has let me forget Windows. I miss it now. Okay, so I'm in this page. What I'm going to do is basically I'm going to go to Sources tab. And let me first quickly explain. I'm going to put two breakpoints here. Okay. So what I'm doing is basically there is a template which says there is a div class sections, you have a heading on top, and then there is a ng-transclude. We have done that all so many times. And in the ng-transclude we are transcluding this little thing called span class transclude. Let's see if it works or not. Obviously it's working, but let's see the DOM node created. So you have a div section, heading, ng-transclude. Pretty simple, right? Now, to see how this transclusion happens and at what level the transclusion happens, I would just want to run a debug and see where it works. I I don't need any of these. I just need this whole thing. Okay. I hit refresh. It's going to stop here. What I'm going to see here is this one. This is an instance of the template that I have pushed in. What we have just now said, that in the pre-linking phase, transclusion does not happen. To see that, we go to this one, which says div section. We go to the child nodes. It has two child nodes. Okay, one is h3, the first one, and second one is a div which had that ng transclude thing, right? Agreed? Anyway, it's right. And then so I'm in pre-linking phase. I hit it again. I'm in post-linking phase now. What should ideally happen? Now, the transclusion had already happened, and that whole span thing has come. So let's see it again. I'm in div sections. The child nodes are two. The first one is h3, and the second one is div. When I expanded div before, it did not have any child node. Now, when you expand it, it should have three child nodes. Text, so basically the way what we call the spaces are treated, and this one has been transcluded. So this is the time when it is safe to do all your event injection and stuff like that if you want to really do that. So reiterating it again, the life cycle of a directive is that you have the compile phase that triggers first, then the controller, then the links if needed. In the compile phase, you generally do template transformation. In the controller phase, you would generally do the business logic and methods that you want to share across directives. In the link phase, it's again split into two. Pre-linking phase before the transclusion, post-linking phase after the transclusions. It is recommended that you do scope transformation in the pre-linking phase and DOM injection, event injections in the post-linking phase. Yeah, and you can do inter-directive communication using require and the fourth parameter of your link method. That's 3 hours. Anything else? Yes, questions?
Say if I manipulate the element in the function, would it be visible in the post-link?
It will, but then you will not have references to the transcluded stuff.
Okay, and it will persist even if we have transclusion.
It will persist. The transclusions only will get in. But then that is not the right place. So these are all different places. You can do everything in that. So that's why we say that you might, so when we first start writing directives, you probably would never need compile or controller. You would do everything in your link. That's what we do, link function, and we do everything stuff. But these are all designated places where you are supposed to do things. And there are definitely certain use cases where these are the only places you can do certain stuff. Highly recommended. You see the source codes of Angular UI, and there you would see all these stuff. If you want a good example of compile, look for directive for Bootstrap modal. There are certain nice directives where they actually run compile service inside link to do a post-mature compilation. So basically the template is available, you want to do the compilation again. So you can do that. Highly recommended, go to the directive source codes of Angular itself. It's a gem. They have, basically they are using their own, eating their own dog food, right? The directive is a framework and they are using all these whole ng thing, using the same framework that we have just now discussed these times. There is a very nice thing, which is a simple one. I was just looking at it. In Angular UI, there is a progress bar directive, and it has this this nested directive thing in it. So if you want practical examples of that, that's a place which is, I mean, that's what I found out. It's a very nice place to go and have a look at it. It actually, you will be able to relate to all these things that we just talked about inter-directive communication. What else? I think that's pretty much of it. Any more questions that you guys have? We are 8 minutes. Still, we have 8 minutes. Just a quick thought. How many of you think that you know a little more than what you knew before? Okay. How many of you think that you never wrote a directive, but you can at least try doing that now? Last question. Sorry for bothering. How many of you think directives are awesome? Okay. My last thing is that I sincerely hope that all the good things that Angular team has done in last couple of years, I think there are some interesting stuff coming up like web components and Polymer and stuff like that. All the things that we learned today in directives, syntactically they might be different, but conceptually all these new technologies are same. They're all trying to say that the way web is moving is not really a text anymore. It's more of an application, and these reusable components are really something which is going to save our ass. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, sir. In Angular? Okay, that's I'll give my opinion, the way I have done that, and Daya would hate me for that, but that's my opinion, and I find it comfortable, but people might differ in their ways of doing it. The way we did it is, the way, how many of you know about Suman? Okay, the way Suman bootstraps your application is that it creates a controller folder, it creates a services folder, and then it creates the views and stuff like that, right? So basically, it groups your, it makes folder depending on the kind of files that it is, right? That is good for smaller applications, and it really doesn't matter. When you go for a little larger applications, for example, code size of around 15,000 lines of JavaScript code, it becomes a little problematic, or around 105 JavaScript files. What we have found, or rather over the internet also, people have found is useful that you group your codes by its by modules or by features, stuff like that, right? So let's say you have a header, and that header has a controller, that header has a view, that header has maybe a service, and it may have some directives as well. Unlikely, but yeah. You don't say in the controller header controller.js, in the view header.html, or in the services header.js. What you do is you create a folder called modules, let's say, or features. You create another folder inside it called headers, and then you put all your files related to header inside that. If it is a really complicated one, you can, inside the header folder, you can create folders like services, controllers, views, tests, stuff like that, and put files inside those. That's what we find it more manageable than having monolithic files of controllers and stuff like that. Some disagree. They say that I can definitely use a find and go and find it. But then it's much easier to basically switch off a whole module, just delete that folder if you have screwed up, and delete the reference from the Angular module. Another thing that we have found is that divide your application into modules, not really a monolithic one, and then register all your services or whatever you have in that particular module. For example, if your application has 3 different modules, module A, module B, module C, you actually create an application called angular.module applications, and in the array, you register 3 module A, module B, module C. And you put all your services for module A, register only to module A. In that way, your code becomes much more manageable. People can basically make better sense of code faster than having a monolithic one. My thought, people might differ. Yes? Can you use same directive? You have to just register it. You can. I mean, directives are meant for that. Not necessarily. You can inject a service inside a directive, true. But directive, I don't know. Directive needs a service means? That will be great actually if you really put the data processing logic out of the directive. That's what we talked about in the controller, that you can put a service inside the controller and take all the data processing logic to a separate service or factory or whatever you want. But if I understand your question correctly, you are saying that you have two different Angular applications, and then you want to write directive once and use it in both these applications. All you have to do is basically register the directive. Angular.module, Angular.directive, module name, and the directive registration. That's all. I'm not sure. Yeah.
First suggestion that you made, that is ideal for when you want to create reusable components. Because say you want to remove something totally and then put it somewhere else or reuse somewhere else, and it doesn't have any dependency in the app that you're belonging to. So it has views, it has controllers, services of its own in that same directory, and then you can move it around.
I mean, the idea is not to move it around. I mean, it's like a nice thing that you get. But the point is that, so if I am a cart module, all the files related to cart module stays in a folder.
And then you can put it in any other app that you want.
Yes, if it's truly reusable, all you need to do is pick up the cart module, register that cart module into your new applications if you really want to do that. That's theoretically possible. If you really, so the services obviously you can reuse. Directives and filters you can definitely reuse. The HTML maybe, if you really do it that way, you can reuse the HTML as well. All you have to probably do is change the CSS. Okay, any more questions? Yes, sir. How testable directives are? So that's the nicest part of Angular. Angular is built from grounds up, keeping testability in mind. The code that we have written is not really testable. That's a different story. But you have full testing feature or functionality for directives. We can test each and every part of directive. That's why you can actually put the controller outside also to make it testable. All the links and everything, they are testable. But there is one thing about directives deals with DOM manipulations. So testing is a little tricky here because you might want to stub your DOMs and stuff like that you get into. But it is tricky, but it is possible. But for other parts of Angular, for example, services, filters, controllers, they are very much testable and very well testable. Angular comes by default with Jasmine, which has its own little mocking ways of doing things. But if you're really serious about doing all those mocking, stubbing, and then timers, fake HTTP server, and all that stuff, these are the three combos that we found very useful. Sorry, for your assertion you use Chai. For your testing or the rest of the stuff you use Mocha, and for your mock library you use Sign-on.js. It's a killer combo. You would love it. But for most of the situations, Jasmine would suffice. Istanbul. It's a de facto standard for JavaScript code coverage. It's very nice. We basically put Istanbul on our big monitors, and we look at every day and say, the code coverage is not right. We have to increase it. But yeah, that actually goes deep down to your branch level. It's good. But I think everybody will say that you have to take code coverage with a pinch of salt. I mean, well, you don't have to cover everything. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
So feedback is really important for us, and we don't actually suck at it. So this is a different system for feedback. We have set up a whole Wi-Fi, and I'll just tell you the instructions right now on how to do it. It's really fun, trust me. So we are using a tool called Express for this session. We have set up a special Wi-Fi and to use this tool. So can I request everyone to connect to JS channel Wi-Fi? On your smartphones or your mobiles, anything which you have, just connect to JS channel Wi-Fi. So once you are on JS channel Wi-Fi, just open your mobile browser, laptop browser or anything, and just go to express.com. So just now I'll ask a sample question, and we'll learn how to answer that question, and then we'll move on to serious questions. So we already know you guys are awesome, and we think you are all extremely awesome. But this is something which you rate yourself. This is a sample question. Just keep responding, and we'll see the count here. So I'm guessing we should have at least 200 or 150 odd responses. So just keep on responding, and we'll see what it reaches. And be pretty confident about yourself. Okay, 100. So finally we have 100, and let's keep on increasing it. But this is a sample question, so let's not worry about so much. And we all know you're awesome, but let's still look at the responses. You want to see the responses? Yes. Okay. So I'll just show the responses. Okay. So we have poor 9 people who are pretty low in confidence, but don't worry. We think you are awesome. So not to worry about that. So let's move to a serious question. And so we'll start with Douglas' talk, feedback about his session. And so you just have to type in A, B, C, or D. So I'll read out the options. A, amazing, it was enlightening or life-changing. B, it was pretty good, worth my time. C, if you liked it, but so-so. And D, if it was a waste of time. So I can see people are getting used to the Express, responding pretty fast, and that is pretty good. Cool. Keep on replying. If you accidentally type in another letter, you can change it again. You can change your option. So keep doing it. We'll wait till 110, 120 or so. 94 we have right now. Come on, guys. Let's make it 100. 100. Cool. Let's wait for 10 more. And then we can slog it around and get. Okay, I think we are reaching a stable responses. I think maybe people aren't able to respond so much. But let's move to the next one. We are a little bound for time. So there's something we really need, even though I know you might be wanting to see the results as well. But this is for us, and we want this from you. Let's go to the next one. This was Node and Mintra by Sunil Pai. Same options, A, B, C, D. A, amazing, to D, not worth my time. And you guys are getting used to it. Now let's hit 100 much faster this time. Come on, guys. We have so many questions. We'll have to do it really fast, otherwise it will take more than an hour for us. So we'll just wait till 100. Any other guy? Who is the 99th one? Okay. There will be another feedback on this feedback tool pretty soon. Okay, so this is the next one. Ember.js talk by Suchit Puri. Same choices. And with respect to the time, I think we'll have to move a little quicker. Okay, next question. This was functional programming techniques in JavaScript by Magesh Kopan. Let's move to the next one. Now this was HTML5 game programming by Kapil Manchanda. Folks who attended this session. Guys, let's do it quickly. So that we can move fast. Okay, I think we are stable on this. So now this is my favorite question of this whole feedback session. The next one. This is an open question. So don't type A, B, C, D. Type in your full responses. The lightning talk which you liked best. And there's a wink in that. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you. But none of you signed the petition. I was watching it whole night that people will maybe sign it. So this is the morning talk by Amod, and this is again ABCD. So please type in your responses. Cool. All right, let's move to the next one. Now this is by Magesh Kupan again, evented models and testable views. So moving to the next one. This was by Hemant. Sorry for the misspelling. This was the new gen of gen function. Coming up, next one. Now this was Angular directive session by Suman and Naresh. So guys who attended this session, please give the feedback. So moving to the next question, session by Joe. This was the WebRTC and HTML5 video session. Okay. So now let's move to the open question again. So there's an open question again, and you don't type in choices. Type in your full okay. So this was, sorry again. So this was Beyond JavaScript by Sati. This is a closed question. Guys, hotel is something we cannot improve. We don't own the hotel. So, definitely I can improve myself. Next year I'll make my session even better. So I think it has gone out of the screen. So people have trolled so much. I don't like this. So guys, that's with the session, feedback session. So thank you for taking time for this. And Sujay, can you come for the closing?
All right, thank you everybody. I mean, this was a great last 2 days. I hope you all enjoyed this as much as we did. So a quick request now. So if all of you can come up to the stage, we'll take a group photograph with all of us.
Join panel. Close, please. Close, ready.
Guys, cheer up a little bit.
Flash victory sign or Just a second, please. Just a second. Just a second. That will get some picture, right? Ready? Yeah, from that time. Steady.